Hello, everybody, and welcome to Talkin' Tunes with Dr. Tony. I have a special show today as I'm going to be doing a video with my niece's husband, Ken, and we're going to be talking about the Moody Blues, specifically their 7 classic albums. There really was not a group like the Moody Blues in terms of their democratic approach to making music. They were classified as the world's smallest symphony orchestra, and conceptually they were just fantastic with the types of songs they wrote about. Their harmonies were great, their arrangements were great, so I hope you're going to appreciate and enjoy this video. My first exposure to the Moody Blues was on the albums To Our Children's Children, which was their 4th album. And I was hanging out with my high school friend and listening to it late at night before we crashed. I loved how each song flowed seamlessly into the next. Later, I heard Days of Future Past and In Search of the Lost Chord on a really nice stereo at my friend's house. And he said that listening to the Moody Blues was like going to church. I guess he was referring to the spiritual qualities that many people perceive. Later, if I had trouble falling asleep, I'd put on an 8-track version of Days of Future Past and let it play continuously until the sun came up. I recall living at Hermosa Beach and listening to all the Moody Blues albums up to Seventh Sojourn on headphones while laying on the round waterbed in our living room. I just finished reading a very comprehensive book about the Moody Blues history, actually part 1, where the author in the introduction talked about his gradual introduction to the Moodies and how he gradually came to listen to all albums up to the classic 7. He came to love all 7 as I have. Later, he was quite shocked and surprised to find that not everyone felt that way. In fact, many people vehemently dislike the Moodies and were not afraid to express their opinion. Most of you are probably fans, otherwise you would not be here watching this video. So here I find myself reviewing and rating the Classic 7 with Ken, my niece's music-loving husband, another Moody Blues fan. We're going to do a countdown to the Classic 7 and then do the same for our top 10 songs from the Classic 7. So let's get to it. Okay, well, here we are, everybody, and we're going to be talking about one of our favorite bands for probably close to 1 hour, maybe a little bit less, but we'll just see how that goes. So we're going to be talking about the Moody Blues. And I have one of my relatives here by marriage, Ken Dombrowski, and he's been watching some of my YouTube videos, and we discovered that we both have a real affinity for the Moody Blues, so we thought it would be fun to talk about our favorite Moody Blues albums from their classic period of 7 albums. So I'm going to ask Ken to go ahead and start it off and pick his 7th favorite album of that time period. And if he has a copy of the vinyl or CD that he could show that's fine. If not, I'll just be superimposing the image so we all can see what the cover looks like, which is really one of the main draws of the Moody Blues is their album artwork. So go ahead, Ken, with your 7th favorite Moody Blues album.
Sure. Yeah, maybe before we start, just a quick note. I kind of researched out, and for those people that are not very familiar with the Moody Blues, there really was 2 different time periods for that band, and we're going to be focusing on the classic period. Interesting enough, all of their bigger hits, the ones that really, sold the most, was in their second phase when they turned into the popular 80s. But those, I think we're both in agreement, Tony. Those are nice pop hits, but they really don't hit that classic rock period, the classic rock period of the Moody Blues, which is what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, you know, I discovered the same thing, Ken. I went and I found that Octave, um, Long Distance Voyager, and what's the other one?
Other Side of Life.
Yeah, they all were
Yeah,
platinum selling albums.
they were.
But
Those were.
if you go to rate your music, those three albums are lower rated than the seven that we're talking about. So they became more commercially successful later on in that second phase, but the albums were not rated as highly. So that's an interesting observation we both made. So that's pretty cool.
Okay. So if we talk about the seven, and I don't know if you and I are going to be in agreement with our top ones or our favorite ones, but I think if I work down the listing, I think my starting with the seventh, for me it would be the last classic one, which is the seventh Sojourn. I felt that at that time period, the best song on there definitely was really hitting it hard with the rock period of "I'm Just a Singer in a Rock and Roll Band," which was done by John Lodge at the time. And John Lodge, which was their kind of their bassist, their guitar guy, he was really that heavy advocate for, I think, that rock and roll sound. So I love that song, "I'm Just a Singer in a Rock and Roll Band." I love the album itself, but compared to the other classic ones, I didn't rank it as high because I felt that they were really starting to try to get a little more trendy in the Seventh Sojourn album in dealing with the rock and roll phase. And there's some good melodies in that one. Some of my favorites are Justin Hayward, of course, the main vocalist of the Moody Blues. He had a beautiful one on there called "The Land of Make Believe." I really like that "Land of Make Believe" a lot. And I also Mike Pinder, who is really their instrumentalist, who kind of reinvented how instrumentals are done. I'm a huge advocate of instrumentals, and I felt that he brought in some different instruments. One of them, which we'll probably talk about later, is the mellotron. I did a little background on that one, but he did "Lost in a Lost World" on Seventh Sojourn, which I thought was also good. So very good album, but I would have to rank that probably at the lowest one of their seven. That's at least my opinion. So
Yeah, and you know, it's kind of a rigged rating system here because I think that we like all seven albums. So
yes,
trying to diminish one is difficult. Now I saw the Moody Blues one time, and it was during that album.
yeah,
So I got to hear "The Land of Make Believe" and also "New Horizons."
yes,
Loved both of those songs. So I saw those live, and they were fantastic. I mean, really, really good.
yeah,
Um, so that album, I remember the first time I heard it, I was in a record store in Cerritos, California, in the mall, and they were playing it. And I said, "Oh, the Moody Blues have a new album," and really, really enjoyed that album quite a bit. So now my number seven is actually their first number one ranked album in the UK, and it's "On the Threshold of a Dream." Now, this album for me was kind of the later albums that I came to for the Moody Blues. I really was probably least familiar with this one of the sevens, but got some notes here. In the UK, like I mentioned, it was number one, and the US it ranked number 20, but it was a platinum selling album. And on Rate Your Music, it's got a 3.63, which is all pretty uniform. So the reason why I put this album number seven is there's a long interlude at the end of side one, which is Mike Pinder doing a lot of playing and singing that I think goes on too long. It's like 8 minutes long. And I got to tell you, I'm not a big fan of John Lodge in general. His falsetto voice to me is just a little bit too high. Um, so there's this one song called "Send Me No Wine," which I'm not a real big fan of that. But Justin Hayward here, I mean, he's got some tremendous songs, and you know, these albums all started off with some weird sound effects, and this
Yeah.
one's got it, which is pretty cool. Um, so again, you know, it's not that I don't like these albums. On a scale of 1 to 10, I would probably give this an 8.5, which is my lowest ranked record. So that's on the threshold of a dream. But a lot of people pick this as their number one favorite Moody Blues album. So go figure.
Yeah.
So what'd you come up with number 6?
Number 6 was again. This is it's very tough, very challenging.
Yeah.
But I would probably pick "To Our Children's Children" as number 6. Love the music. The opening of that I think is just fantastic. It's Graham Edge doing he was known for his poetry. He did a lot of poetry, and he goes into the higher and higher. I love that kickoff. But then some of the songs I think were really good, but they just didn't stand out. I think that was to me that was Graham Edge's maybe best album. You know, one thing I liked about the Moody Blues is that they, as an artist, they kind of took turns, at least in my opinion, on the different albums that they did, and each gave them an opportunity to be their own vocalist. Of course, Justin Hayward was their major vocalist, but I thought Graham Edge kind of really shined with "To Our Children's Children." I do love the second side of that album a lot. It really, it's interesting, but the song lineup, they're each of the band members, Hayward, Thomas, Lodge, and Pinder, they all take turns and they all do a great vocal song on side 2 there, starting with Hayward's Gypsy. Then Ray Thomas, who we'll talk about him on another, album, his Legend of a Mind, but he did Eternity Road. I really like Eternity Road a lot. Then Candle of Life I thought was good by Lodge. It was kind of a nice harmony. And then Pinder mixed it up a little bit where he was more the instrumental guy, but then he did His Sun Is Still Shining. So I love to listen to that whole side. One thing I noticed about the Moody Blues is there are certain album sides that they all have to be listened to me as a group, because it just varies the way the melodies are done and the variants that they do. So that was my number 6. But again, it's so hard to pick.
I just listened to that album today. And what's interesting about that album is there was a knock against it because they couldn't play those songs in concert. The only one they would play would be Gypsy, because the rest of them were so heavily produced and really just kind of flowed with each other that it was difficult for them to pick one. So that was an interesting observation. So what's number 5 for you?
Oh, you want me to go number 5 for me?
Yeah.
All right. Okay. I would say number 5 was, again, tough pick, but their Question of Balance album. One of my favorite Moody Blues songs is on that album, and that's Question. Justin Hayward, to me, with how he portrays and he asks, kind of thinking into your future, it really always, I like to kind of listen to that when I want to be inspired or I'm kind of lost in the direction that I want to go, because that song Question is talking about things to look forward to. What do I want in my future? One of the best hits on there. The rest of the album, again, very tough, very good. Ray Thomas does a great one on there, and The Tide Rushes In. I like that one. Very kind of more of a melancholy song on that one. And then I like the innovation that John Lodge did on Tortoise and the Hare. He's talking kind of the story of the tortoise and the hare, but how he does the music and the melodies, and he ties it into some instrumentals with those. I thought those were kind of the standouts of that album. And then it closes with the balance, which is kind of a poetic journey that Graham Edge takes, and he harmonizes with Ray Thomas in that one.
You know, when I looked at Rate Your Music, the 7 albums we're talking about, they range in ratings from 3.5 to 3.82 out of 5. I can't think of another group that would have 7 albums in succession where the ratings were so closely clustered together, which really speaks to the overall excellence of their albums. And then beginning with Octave, they went below 3. Octave was only at 2.92. So the fact that we are struggling in trying to rate these albums is not surprising, because they all are good. I mean, there's not a bad one of the 7. So that's
No.
pretty amazing. All right, so we're definitely starting to have some divergence here. My number 6 will probably surprise you, is In Search of the Lost Chord. And this album was kind of a response to the first one, because they played all the instruments on this album. A lot of people thought that they were just a orchestra-based band, and they said, no, we're going to play all the instruments ourselves this time to show you what we're capable of doing. And this is a good album. Again, I would rate this one. What did I rate this at? I rate this at 9 out of 10. So that's pretty interesting. It's my 6th favorite album, but it's 9 out of 10. But House of Four Doors, again, it's John Lodge, and it's kind of hokey with all the creaking doors going on. And then the last song, Om, that to me is really dated. I got into transcendental meditation for a while, and they gave me my mantra. It wasn't Om, but it was something similar. But other than that, I think it's a really, really good album. Again, the Justin Hayward songs are fantastic. As a matter of fact, one of them is one of my top 10. I'll mention that in a little bit. One of the things I didn't do, Ken, is I intentionally excluded Ride My Seesaw, Question, Tuesday Afternoon, and Nice and White Satin. You're not going to find those in my top 10, because I've heard them so much that I wanted to give other selections an opportunity. Of course, they're fantastic songs, but there's others that I would rather listen to, because I've just heard those so many times that I don't need to hear them again. I love The Best Way to Travel, Mike Pinder. That's really got a good message. You don't need to get on a plane and travel thousands of miles and get jet lagged. You can just go somewhere in your mind. So that was my number 6. And my number 5 was your number 7, The Seventh Sojourn. I told you the other day when we talked on the phone that Isn't Life Strange, with that vibrato. I think it's just way too excessive on John Lodge's voice. So that discounted this album down for me. I still gave it a 9.25. For My Lady, we didn't talk about that, Ray Thomas. That's a great song. It's kind of a sea song. You can see somebody playing their little accordion, and somebody just kind of dancing around. And then, of course, New Horizons, The Land of Make Believe. You and Me is good. That's a Graham Edge. So yeah, it's a strong album, really good. So that's my number 5. Number 5. Okay, so you're up with your number 4 and number 3.
So it's really getting hard now, because The harmonies of all of these albums are just so good to me. Uh, I'd have to say number four probably came in with their album called "Every Good Boy Deserves Favor." Um, I love the creativity of this album, and I love the harmonies of this album. By creativity, I mean it opens with uh, sort of a journey, a musical journey with harmonies called Procession. And it's kind of like almost a music walk in life. And I just thought that that was very creatively done. Um, I think it's one of those that really grew on me because at first, sometimes the first time I hear some of these Moody Blues songs, I was like, whoa, do I really like that or not? But the more I hear them, I really enjoy them. But that procession to me was really well done, and it has all the band members as part of the song, the procession. And then as that wraps up, goes into a really nice rock and roll Justin Hayward "Story in Your Eyes," which was one of their more popular hits. And I think Justin Hayward really nailed that one well on that A side of that album. And then Lodge again, who usually to me is more of their rock and roll guy. He does a beautiful on side two, "One More Time to Live," which I felt really has two different parts of that song. One's very a lot of melody, talking about life, and then it goes into the uh, different types of feelings a person has, like desolation, and really, I think that one really hit home a lot. And then the beauty to me on side two of "You Can Never Go Home" with Justin Hayward. Beautiful melody. He's got such a great voice. I thought that one really suited him well. So those were the highlights of those albums for me. And then number three, number three comes in with their number one, which is "Days of Future Past" was number three for me. And the more I look at number three and what they tried to do at the time with the introduction of the instrumentals and the symphony, that was the partnership that they had with the London Symphony Orchestra, which was "The Days of Future Past." And I just thought that was such a well done album in terms of the creativity with tying in the symphonic music, but actually the creativity of taking the journey of a day. What is a day about? And just the way it starts with uh, the dawn of the day, and it works through the morning, and then at the mid lunchtime we have peak hour, and you can just tell by the melody that you're kind of in a busy environment, like we all get into a very busy environment. Uh, but I would say out of all the sides, the one that's really one of the most beautiful is the side B of that album. I always like to listen to that one as a whole and take that journey from starting with the afternoon, which of course was their very popular Tuesday afternoon, but listening to the journey they take from the afternoon, working into the evening, working into the sunset twilight time, and then closing that with "Nights in White Satin." I just felt that the way they did their melodies and harmonies and the way all of them pitched in to do that, I thought it was really fantastic.
It's interesting. I just finished reading a 700 plus page book on the Moody Blues. This guy actually wrote 2 volumes. He stopped in with octave, and then the second volume is the post octave. But they talk about George Martin as being the fifth Beatle. Well, we could have this guy right here who could be the sixth Moody Blues, and that's Tony Clark. He's the guy who did all the sequencing, all the transitioning of their songs. That was left up to him. It wasn't the Moody Blues. And going back to Days of Future Past, all the orchestration was done after the album was recorded. They came into the studio and they added all those interludes. So it was not anything done in real time. It was done after the fact. And Tony Clark is the one who was uh, participating in that. So the guy is really, really good because when you listen to the Moody Blues on headphones, you could really see how the transitions were done so seamlessly because they just flow from one song into another. Now, I got to tell you, on Days of Futures Past, it's not that seamless. You could tell where the orchestra was stopped, and then here comes the band. And I
Mhm.
think it was such a new thing in 1967, and the technology may not have been there to do that. But so my number four is also Every Good Boy Deserves Favor.
Okay.
Number four. And I'll tell you, when you got a really killer stereo system and you want to put it through its paces, you put this album on, and that opening procession thing with all the rainfall and the drums and the tribal chants and the sitar and all of that. And then when it goes into the story in your eyes, that is gives you goosebumps. I mean, it's such a really great song. So that album is good. I also like After You Came, which closes side one, which to me almost sounds like The Who. I mean, they're really, really rocking hard on that song. And when they played live in concert, they did a lot better job with their live stuff. So I love that album so much, and it really pained me to put it at number four,
Yeah, me
but I
too.
had to. Um, it was only a gold album. It never became platinum even. So what can we say? Now my number three is this one, Question of Balance. Now, this one came after to our children's children, and by comparison, they could play all these songs live. So they made a concerted effort to strip them down where they could go into the concert hall and play them without any trouble whatsoever. And I agree with you that there are some really good cuts on this album. As a matter of fact, um, the only one that I don't really care for, I know a lot of people love, is Melancholy Man. It goes on too long. It's the longest cut on the album, but Justin Hayward, is fantastic on this, and John Lodge is good too. Um, so yeah, so this is my number three. I gave Every Good Boy Deserves Favor a 9.5, and this one I gave it a 9.75. So
Wow.
that's my number three. So you got two more to go. Is that right?
Yes. So I have two more to go, and you and I think we're both definitely in agreement. You know that they're just all of this albums are solid, hard to rank. Um, I think that maybe my listening pleasure ties a lot with different harmonies and different instrumentals that might be a little different than the way you look at it. Because a couple, my number two is actually one of your lower rankers, which is In Search of the Lost Chord,
Okay.
was my number two, and uh, I feel that at the period of time between what the Moody Blues were doing and also what the Beatles were doing, I felt there were a lot of similarities with some of the things they were tying in, uh, what the Moody Blues were tying into In Search of the Lost Chord. Uh, uh, an interesting music fact: the mellotron, which was the Mike Pinder instrument, which is kind of like maybe your early synthesizer of the '80s, but it was a very electronic synthesizer of that time period back in the '70s and '60s. He introduced that. He introduced that to the Beatles,
Yeah.
and he introduced it to John Lennon, Paul McCartney, and they used that instrument on Strawberry Fields. The Beatles did.
I
But
read that
anyway,
in that book.
I like In Search of the Lost Chord a lot. for its melodies and for some of the messaging it's trying to capture. So side one, we have the departure with the poem of Graham Edge, but then that goes into the really well done Ride My Seesaw, which is, the rock and roll classic of John Lodge. But then what I really think is a standout is when they do go into the House of Four Doors.
Okay.
And that introduction and how it ties into that Legend of a Mind. That Legend of a Mind to me is just such a classic with how they do it. And I think it's just the way you and I are interpreting some of those melodies. And then what I really like about
they hung out with Timothy Leary shortly after they wrote that, but they did not drop acid with him, which was interesting because they had taken acid before meeting him, but they didn't do that, and they really had an affinity with him, which is interesting.
So what's interesting is I don't really think you and I think because these albums are so close and they're so good, just because our rankings are off, I don't think we have a big disconnect. It's just how we interpret some of the melodies. Sure. And then side two, I really like some of the messaging of Hayward and Thomas do a piece on there called "The Visions of Paradise." I just like how that was done, and now it is definitely, maybe a little dated because it ties to the '60s, but that whole '60s psychedelic period, I really think it really comes out in that Visions of Paradise, and then the message that Hayward does on the actor. I really like the way he was portraying a message of how he's trying to outline who he is, and he's this actor. So I enjoyed that album just like all the others, but I have to give that a little higher in the ranking myself.
Well, it sounds like your number one is my number 7.
And number one is number 7, and I think it's because as you mentioned, it's just how you look at the melodies and the instruments. And I've always been an instrumental guy. Mike Pinder had a journey where what I was reading was he liked some of the old instrumental guys like Mantovani and some of the great instrumental leaders of the orchestras, and he tried to tie that into the electronics. And I've always had that interest, and I've always had the ear for that. So the standouts on A Threshold of the Dream is just the way it starts with In the Beginning with Graham Edge, and then Lovely to See You Again. I think it's a very peppy, popular Justin Hayward song. I do like Send Me No Wine by John Lodge. It's kind of poppy, but it was good. But I think where they really went, side two of that album, I think is just a big standout to me. Because it does start with Never Comes the Day from Hayward, but then how it works into there's a dream sequence in there where Graham Edge is talking about his poetic vision of the dream, and then Pinder takes it off with that Have You Heard, and then you go into that. I think the creativity of that voyage was just phenomenal. I remember when I was younger, when you put your headphones on and you listen to that one, the play between the left to the right, that melody would bounce from the left ear to the right ear, and then also they would actually start growing. The piano in that one would start growing in audio level, and it got to almost a mesmerizing piece. So I thought that was a real big standout. But again, it's hard to rank all of these with the Moody Blues. I really struggle to do the rankings.
Yeah, well, the most important thing is that we have a chance to talk about these albums. The ranking to me is incidental. So the number 2 for me, look at this. It's a twofer.
Oh, look at that.
I bought this in the Yucatan. So we were driving across the Yucatan Peninsula, and I stopped into a store, and they had a bunch of Mexican CDs, but they had this. And this is in Spanish. Well, it's Tu el precio de uno. So, but what's cool about this, Ken, is that there's a lot of bonus tracks that they recorded during those sessions of Days of Future Past and In Search of the Lost Chord.
Okay.
I got this for just a couple bucks, and this is my only recording of Days of Future Past, which
Okay.
I had to put up there because you talk about a landmark effort. Because it's interesting. Um, the Moody Blues were going down for the count before John Lodge and Justin Hayward joined, and they really redefined themselves with that album in a very meaningful way, where a lot of people think that Days of Future Past is the first prog rock album, and that really kind of set the stage for what was going to come later. But that had to be up near the top because it's just a really, really great album. But interestingly, my number one is kind of flipped of what you did. It's to our children's children's children. Now, the reason this is my number one is the reasons. The first, this is the first Moody Blues album I ever heard. And as you rightly said, other than Gypsy, there's no real standout song on this album. They all just kind of flow from one to another in really nice continuity. And I love that about it. There's not one bad cut on the whole album, and I really love it quite a bit. So that's my number one, and it's probably because it's the first one that I've heard. If I would have heard On a Threshold of a Dream, that would have been probably my number one. So
Yeah.
and I give this a 10 because, like I said, I just listened to it today, and there's not a bad cut on this album at all.
No,
It's
there is
just
not.
really,
Yes.
really good. So,
Yes.
anyways, well, why don't we go through our top 10 songs? And hopefully, you have those.
Oh, let's see. I didn't quite rank them, but let me look real quick here.
Well, it's interesting. My number 10 is from On a Threshold of a Dream, and it's To Share Our Love by John Lodge.
Okay.
Which I think is a pretty good rock and roll song from him, and I really like that song quite a bit. So I'd put that as my number 10, To Share Our Love. It's the only one from Threshold of a Dream.
Mine would be I put Gypsy down as my number
Okay.
10,
Okay.
and number nine is actually on the same side, which is Watching and Waiting.
Mm.
I like that one a lot.
Guess what? Watching and Waiting is my number one. That's my favorite
Okay.
song. That song really resonates with me in terms of just longing for something that you don't have, right?
Yes.
I also had a couple honorable mentions. Never Comes a Day is my honorable mention. And then I had to put Question on there as well. So my number 9 is And the Tide Rushes In. I love that song. Ray Thomas is probably he is my second favorite vocalist other than Justin Hayward. I mean, some people say Justin Hayward should sing everything. And it's hard to argue because he is so good. So good. Have you heard the Blue Jay album that he did with
I have. Yes.
John Lodge?
Yes.
You like that?
Yes, I do. I've always liked Justin Hayward. I thought he's always. I think the melodies change a little bit, but he's got such a powerful voice.
Then he also did that album called Songwriter, the solo album. Have you heard that?
I have not. I haven't heard that one.
Yeah. See, the problem with him is that his songwriting is not as good as his voice. And I think if he gets to pick like 3 or 4 songs on an album, every song's going to be great. But if he's got 12 songs that he's got to do, there's going to be too much monotony. And that's been a criticism I have as a solo artist. But anyway, so you had number 10 was Watching and Waiting. Number 9, Gypsy, or did I
Yes.
have it reversed?
Reversed.
Okay, what's number 8?
Number 8, I would have to put as One More Time to Live.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't have that in my top 10, but it's a great song.
Yeah.
Number 8 was Floating.
Okay.
You know, Ray Thomas has those childlike songs, right?
Yes.
Floating is one of those where it just kind of bounces along. I remember listening to that. I had it on 8-track tape, and I was driving home from my first year in college, and I used to listen to that album on 8-track going home, and love that song. What's your number 7?
I would. You might not have this one. I know Twilight Time from Days of Future Past.
Don't have that one, but that's a good one.
That's a beautiful one.
Yeah. My number 7 is Out and In from To Our Children's Children's Children. Gazing at the Planets, Looking for Total View. Mike Pinder, correct? I've
Yes.
been waiting here for hours. Got to make a journey. Out and In. Fantastic song. Really great. What's next for you?
The next one for me would be number 6.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be the actor. The actor.
That's my number 6 also.
Oh, really? Okay.
Love that song. Fantastic.
Yeah, very good song.
Really good. So we're on the same wavelength there. What's number 5 for you?
Number 5, I have to go with, even though it's one of their most popular ones, was I'm Just a Singer. I just love that. I just love that one. And, I hear it a lot, and I just enjoy that one.
Yeah, I've heard it too much.
Yeah.
My number 5 is Gypsy. How about number 4?
And number 4 goes with the most played, Nights in White Satin. Still made my list. That one doesn't get old to me. I put that one as number 4.
You haven't had anything from Seventh Sojourn yet. My number 4 is The Land of Make Believe.
Yeah. I'm Just a Singer was my.
Okay, there you go. You're right.
5. That was from Seventh Sojourn.
You know, we haven't mentioned anything about Ray Thomas's flute playing. I'm going to do a show pretty soon on flute playing. Because if you think about the late 60s and early 70s, a lot of bands had flute players, but that ship has sailed. I mean, you never hear the flute anymore. And Ray Thomas, he was pretty good. As a matter of fact, on The Actor, he double tracks his flute. So that's kind of interesting. So then you got number 3.
Number 3, I think you might have. Did you mention Never Comes the Day? No, that's my number 3.
My honorable mention.
Yeah, Never Comes the Day. I really like that one a lot.
My number 3 is You Can Never Go Home Anymore.
Oh yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one.
That to me is so sad. You know, that's true. For me, the town that I grew up in, the population is the same now as it was when I was there. But if I went there on a Sunday afternoon and walked up and down the street when people pretty much would be home, I would not see one person that I know. The whole town has turned over since that time. And it's true, you can never go home anymore. Now, other people, I used to work with a guy that was from Saline, Michigan, and he would go back home, and he said he'd go into a bar and everybody in there went to high school with him. All they did, they put in one stop signal. That's the only change. So a lot of these Midwestern towns, they really haven't changed, but in Southern California, the whole thing has turned over. So
yeah, beautiful song. That's a beautiful song.
How about number 2 for you?
And number 2, Ray Thomas made my number 2 with his flute, "Legend of a Mind." I just thought between the instrumentals and the harmonies of that one, that's number 2 for me.
Yep. My number two, off of Question of Balance, is It's Up to You.
Oh, okay.
They got that like a Hawaiian guitar in the intro,
Yep.
and then
Okay.
he comes in and plays a regular guitar. Um, Great song. So well, I already told you my number one. What's your number one?
My number one is Question.
Question, yeah.
I've always was inspired by that song. I always, when I feel down, I always listen to that one. I
Yeah.
always think it's beautiful.
My number one is Watching and Waiting.
Yep. Yep. Beautiful song.
So I got four off of To Our Children's Children. I got a couple off of Question of Balance. One off of In Search of the Lost Chord. One off of Threshold. One off of Seventh Sojourn. One off of Every Good Boy Deserves Favor. Every Good Boy Deserves Favor. Yep. So it's funny. I was reading about the Mellotron. When they would play live, the Mellotron was a real pain because it would typically get damaged. And
Hmm.
it was basically it was a bunch of tapes. So you hit
Hmm.
a key, and it'll play a tape for up to say 8 seconds. And if you don't want it to play for 8 seconds, you would stop it. So Mike Pinder, he actually worked at a company that developed the Mellotron in 1963 and 64. And
Mm.
so he was really a master of it, but it was such a pain that eventually they had this thing called a Chamberlain, which replaced the Mellotron. And then they had the Moog synthesizer that came along. So that's what he was playing later on in his career. So it's pretty interesting that instrument. But
Yeah, that history. Yeah.
so we did a good job, I think.
Well, this was really, I had a lot of fun doing this. It was really, really fun talking old classic albums,
Well,
music.
the Moody Blues they have a special place in my life because there was really no one like them. I remember when Genesis first came out, the reviewers talked about them as being a more sinister Moody Blues. And I thought that was an interesting depiction of them. But you mentioned that they had a lot of democracy in the band where everybody had a chance to do something. And I thought that was really one of their strengths.
Yes.
And they were not virtuoso musicians, but their songwriting and their arranging and their harmonies really, I think, were their strengths. And I thought that they did a good job conceptually with their different ideas that really put them in a class by themselves. And unfortunately, I think they stayed around for too long.
Yeah.
If anybody saw them in concert in the 2000s, I've made a point of not seeing any of my favorite bands when they've outstayed their welcome because I want to remember them as they were. For example, with The Who, I only saw the original Who. I saw them 3 times. I never saw them after Keith Moon died because they were a different group. And a lot of people, they go and they pay these outrageous sums of money to see these bands that are basically a shell of their former selves. And
Well,
I just don't do it.
I've listened to I've listened to a lot of what you've talked about in the past, and I think I kind of in agreement with you. Is I have a hard time sometimes when the bands try to reinvent themselves because they're reinventing themselves just to be popular. And I think Moody Blues is a perfect example of that. They nailed it when they came back. They regrouped and they became very popular in the 80s, and people loved them because they had those pop hits. But as I look through the journey of some of these groups and how they go from a traditional, they have a unique sound, a unique voice, and then it goes for a period of time and it gets captured beautifully. But then all of a sudden later, they reinvent themselves to be more popular. It's kind of hard for me in a way.
Well, they're tired of being broke.
Right, right, yeah, right,
It's not
right.
funny. George Benson is a perfect example. So he was a jazz studio musician, session guy forever, where he just played guitar. And then he
Uh,
came out with that album called Breezin'. And he sang that song, This Masquerade, which
uh,
was a big hit. And after that, he said, well, I'm going to start singing because now I can make some money. And his guitar playing really was de-emphasized. And I don't begrudge him that because,
no, no, not at all. Right,
he paid his dues. But, it's just, it's kind of hard to take as a fan when you want that band to remain intact and be faithful to their original sound. And
right,
they get a lot of advice, and it's hard to turn your back. The worst person of that is Bob Dylan. I've seen Bob Dylan twice in this century, and it's the only time I've seen him, and both times it was awful. I mean, it was really, really bad, where his singing wasn't that good to begin with, and then it there wasn't one song that he played that was recognizable. They were so radically rearranged. His band was good, but a lot of people will go and pay money because they want to see a living legend.
yeah,
And I just felt ripped off. I mean, I really walked away from that concert with a bad feeling.
yeah,
But what can you do?
right.
Okay, well, look, I think we did a good job, and maybe Justin Hayward will take a peek at our video. He's been doing some of these concerts on these cruise ships,
Oh, okay,
and John Lodge just did a solo concert,
okay,
and I just read a review of it, and it said that a lot of his vocals, it sounded like he was out of breath
okay,
without running. But he's singing a lot of songs that he never sang with the Moody Blues, just
okay.
because that's what people like. But he's also doing some of his own stuff. Um, but again, it's really dicey going to one of those shows because you could walk away like, oh my gosh, that was
Yeah,
terrible.
right, yeah.
But fortunately, we have all this recorded music. And it's interesting. I watched some of the old YouTube Moody Blues videos where they played live, and Peak Hour, they played that on a French TV show, and it's Ray Thomas and John Lodge singing together. Justin Hayward is not even singing; he's just in the background playing guitar, and it sounded really good
Okay,
because Ray Thomas's voice is pretty strong, and John Lodge was singing kind of this to fill in harmony. So if you have a chance, if you want to go check them out,
yeah,
uh,
we'll do that.
it's pretty good. You know, I will not watch any of these old videos that are lip synced. Like, why bother?
Yeah, right,
But if they're doing it live, it actually sounds pretty good.
yeah.
All right. Well, look,
Well,
why don't we call it a day? I think I have dinner
thank you,
ready for
Dr.
me.
Tony. Yeah,
This
thank
was
you.
fun.
It's been fun. Thanks for the conversation.
And if you want to do another one someday, I'm not really that big on a lot of the instrumentalists like Martin Denny or Manavani. I
Mhm.
mean,
Uh,
I'm willing to take a deep dive into those guys, and
okay,
we could do that, and then you can lead the conversation because you're definitely going to be the expert on that for sure.
okay. All right. Sounds
Or
good.
anything else that you think would be fun to do.
Okay, sounds good.
Well, say hello to my favorite niece.
Will do. Okay.
Um, she's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, she is. She is. I'm lucky to have her.
You got a good. She's a keeper for sure.
Yeah, she's definitely a keeper. Yeah.
All
Yeah.
right, I'll talk with you
Okay.
later, Ken.
Take care.
Okay, bye bye.
Bye.